Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to have your entire world shattered in a single moment? That's exactly what happened to me. My best friend, the one person I confided in, and my husband, the man I vowed to spend my life with, betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. But what I did next? No one saw it coming. Stay with me, because this story will leave you speechless. I always believed my life was perfect, or so I thought. My name is Emily, and for years, I lived in what felt like a dream. I married my high school sweetheart, Ryan, who was my biggest supporter. We built a life together full of laughter, love, and shared dreams. He was my rock, the kind of husband every woman hopes for. And then there was Sarah, my best friend since college. She wasn't just a friend, she was family. We were inseparable, sharing secrets, vacations, and endless nights of wine and laughter. She was there through every milestone, my wedding, my first anniversary, and even those nights when Ryan and I had arguments. She always had my back. We were the couple everyone admired. Romantic date nights, joint vacations with Sarah and her husband, and holiday dinners where we all toasted to friendship and loyalty. I trusted them with my life. I trusted her. But looking back, maybe the signs were always there. Ryan started working late more often. Sarah began showing up at our house unannounced, staying longer than usual, even after I went to bed. I dismissed my unease as paranoia. After all, this was Ryan, my devoted husband. And Sarah, she was practically my sister. It wasn't until I saw that text message on Ryan's phone, a message that wasn't meant for me, that my world came crashing down. Explicit, intimate, and undeniably from her. My best friend. In that moment, my breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages. The betrayal sliced through me, leaving me gasping for air. I wanted to scream, cry, and confront them both. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled through the pain, pretending everything was fine. While they thought I was broken, I was quietly planning my revenge. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I was going to make them regret ever crossing me. Little did they know the game had just begun. The days after my discovery felt like a living nightmare. Every smile Ryan gave me felt like a lie, and every hug from Sarah made my skin crawl. But I played my part perfectly, the devoted wife and the trusting friend. I noticed the little things first. Ryan's sudden need to work late became more frequent, and he guarded his phone like it held the keys to his soul. He started wearing cologne more often, the kind he knew I loved, but it wasn't for me. Sarah, on the other hand, became more attentive than usual. She called me every day, checking in as if she cared about my well-being. But I could see the guilt in her eyes. She stammered when I asked simple questions, like what she did over the weekend or why she looked so tired. One night, Ryan came home later than ever. He reeked of perfume that wasn't mine, and there was a faint lipstick smudge on his collar. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but I held back. Instead, I asked if he wanted dinner, pretending not to notice. Inside, my heart was breaking, but I refused to let them see it. Sarah's behavior grew more erratic. She started avoiding long conversations and kept glancing at her phone whenever we were together. It was as if she was waiting for a message, probably from him. I felt my rage build with every passing day, but I reminded myself to be patient. I needed to be sure. One evening, I decided to test them. I told Sarah that I was leaving town for the weekend to visit family. I even packed a small suitcase to make it believable. What I didn't tell her was that I wasn't leaving. Instead, I parked my car a few blocks away and waited. Hours passed before I saw it. Ryan's car pulled up in front of Sarah's house, and my stomach dropped. I watched from the shadows as he walked inside without hesitation. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled and tears blurred my vision. But I didn't let my emotions control me. Not yet. I took pictures, proof of their betrayal. And as I sat there in the darkness, my mind began to spin. I wasn't going to cry or beg for answers. I was going to take everything they held dear and make them pay for what they did to me. I started planting seeds of doubt in Sarah's mind. I dropped subtle hints that Ryan had been distant lately, and that I felt something was off. I even mentioned seeing a strange number pop up on his phone. She swallowed the bait, her nervous laughter giving her away. At the same time, I started showing Ryan that I was pulling away emotionally. I made myself look distant and preoccupied, which only seemed to make him more attentive, as if he feared I was catching on. The tension between us grew thicker by the day. Ryan started asking more questions about where I was going, who I was talking to, and why I seemed distracted. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. And Sarah, she was unraveling. Her guilt made her paranoid, and every casual question I asked seemed to send her into a panic. I watched them both squirm, pretending not to notice, all the while savoring the power I held over them. The trap was set, and soon it would snap shut. The longer I waited, the more my plan took shape. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to shatter their world the way they had shattered mine. But first, I needed to get closer to my target. Sarah's husband Daniel had always been kind to me. Quiet, reserved, and respectful, he was the polar opposite of Ryan. Over the years, we'd shared polite conversations and friendly smiles. But after discovering Ryan and Sarah's betrayal, I started seeing him in a different light. Daniel and I were both victims of their lies. That thought created an unspoken bond between us. And I was going to use that connection to push my plan forward. It started subtly. A lingering glance when Sarah wasn't looking. An extra touch on his arm when I laughed at one of his jokes. I saw the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, like he was finally being seen. One evening, Sarah invited me over for dinner, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. As we sat at the table, I couldn't help but notice the tension between her and Daniel. He barely looked at her, and she seemed flustered, making excuse after excuse to leave the table. After dinner, Sarah excused herself to make a phone call, probably to Ryan. That left Daniel and me alone in the living room. The silence between us felt heavy, but instead of breaking it, I let it linger. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my legs in a way I knew would catch his eye. And it did. "I don't know how you do it," he said suddenly. "Do what?" I asked, pretending not to understand. "Keep smiling after everything you've been through," he replied, his voice low. I met his gaze and held it. "Maybe I'm just good at hiding the pain," I said softly. His eyes darkened, and for the first time, I saw something raw and vulnerable beneath his usual calm demeanor. "I know the feeling," he murmured. I let the words hang in the air before reaching out and placing my hand lightly on his. "No one deserves to feel like this, like they're not enough." He didn't pull away. Instead, his hand tightened around mine, and in that moment, I knew he was mine. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I grew closer. Late-night conversations turned into lingering touches, and lingering touches turned into stolen kisses. Each encounter was more electric than the last, and with every moment we spent together, the lines between revenge and desire blurred. The first time it happened, it felt inevitable. It was late, and Sarah had gone out, probably to meet Ryan. Daniel and I were alone, sitting in the dimly lit living room. "You deserve better," I whispered as I leaned in closer. "So do you," he replied, his breath warm against my skin. The kiss that followed was slow, deliberate, and filled with a hunger neither of us could deny. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something we had lost. When it was over, he pulled me into his arms and held me like I was the only thing keeping him grounded. And for the first time in months, I felt powerful. But I wasn't done yet. I made sure Sarah noticed the changes. The way Daniel looked at me. The way he lingered whenever I was around. She started to suspect something, but she couldn't confront me without exposing her own guilt. I could see the fear in her eyes, the cracks forming in the perfect life she had tried to build with my husband. And I reveled in it. The more she squirmed, the closer Daniel and I became. I wasn't just stealing her husband. I was taking back everything she had stolen from me. And then one night it happened. Daniel admitted what I had been waiting to hear. "She doesn't satisfy me anymore," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "I've been starving for something real, something meaningful." I leaned in, my voice barely a whisper. "And have you found it?" He didn't hesitate. "With you," he said, pulling me closer. At that moment, I knew I had won. But the game wasn't over yet. I was just getting started. The night everything unraveled started like any other, but I knew it would end in chaos. My plan had been simmering for months, and now it was finally time to watch it boil over. Sarah had invited me and Daniel to a small dinner party at her house, probably to show off her perfect life and rub salt in my wounds. What she didn't know was that her world was about to collapse, and I was the one holding the match. I arrived early, wearing a dress that I knew would make Daniel's eyes linger. Sarah greeted me with her usual fake smile, but I could tell something was off. Her eyes darted toward Daniel, who barely acknowledged her as he followed me inside. We sat around the table, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Sarah kept glancing at Daniel, clearly sensing that something was wrong. But instead of confronting it, she poured more wine and forced a smile. I waited until dessert before making my move. "Sarah," I said, my voice dripping with sweetness, "I have to thank you." She blinked, confused. "For what?" For being such an amazing friend, I replied, my eyes locked on hers. You've been there for me through everything, even when I felt like my world was falling apart. Her smile faltered. Of course. That's what friends are for. I leaned back in my chair, letting my words sink in. And Ryan, I added casually. He's lucky to have you too. You've always been so attentive to him. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate, and for the first time, Sarah realized he wasn't on her side. Emily, maybe this isn't the time, she began, but I cut her off. No, Sarah. This is exactly the time, I said, my voice sharp. Because tonight, we're finally going to stop pretending. I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed text messages, the ones Ryan had sent her. Explicit. Damning. I tossed them onto the table. What is this? Sarah stammered, her eyes darting between me and Daniel. It's proof, I said coldly. Proof that you've been sleeping with my husband. She gasped, tears welling in her eyes. Emily, it's not what you think. Don't insult me, I snapped. I know exactly what it is. And so does Daniel. Her gaze shot to him, but he didn't defend her. Instead, he stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. How long? He demanded, his voice trembling. Daniel. How long, Sarah? She broke down then, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. But it was too late. I turned to Daniel and reached for his hand. You don't deserve this, I said softly, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Neither of us does. The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was done with her. Sarah lunged toward me, her face contorted with rage. You think you're innocent, she screamed. You're nothing but a manipulative. Stop, Daniel interrupted, stepping between us. You don't get to play the victim. She froze, stunned by his betrayal. I took a step closer, my voice steady. You ruined my marriage, Sarah. And now you're losing yours. The room fell silent except for her ragged breathing. She looked at Daniel, silently pleading, but he shook his head. It's over, he said. I turned to leave, and Daniel followed. Sarah's cries echoed behind us, but I didn't look back. That night, Daniel and I didn't just cross a line. We burned it to the ground. The passion between us ignited like wildfire, fueled by months of suppressed desire and raw emotion. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what we had lost. But the consequences came faster than I expected. 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel. Was this fate's way of tying us together, or a cruel twist to my already complicated plan? When I told Daniel, his reaction shocked me. He wasn't angry or scared. Instead, he looked relieved, like this was exactly what he had been waiting for. We'll figure this out, he promised, pulling me into his arms. Together. Sarah, on the other hand, fell apart. When she found out about the pregnancy, it was the final blow. She tried to fight for Daniel, but he had already made his decision. The divorce was swift and brutal. Sarah was left alone, picking up the shattered pieces of her life, while Daniel and I moved forward. But the story didn't end there. As my pregnancy progressed, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Had I gone too far? Had my desire for revenge turned me into someone I didn't recognize? Every time I looked at Daniel, though, I felt reassured. He loved me. Not because I was a rebound or a distraction, but because I gave him something Sarah never could: loyalty, passion, and trust. Still, I knew the truth. Our relationship was built on broken pieces. And no matter how much we tried to move forward, the scars of betrayal lingered. I had won the battle, but at what cost? The weeks after Sarah's world collapsed felt surreal. She tried to reach out to Daniel, crying, begging, and even threatening to expose me. But it was too late. Her pleas fell on deaf ears, and the divorce papers were signed without hesitation. For the first time in months, I felt victorious. I had reclaimed my life, my confidence, and my happiness, or so I thought. But as the dust settled, the consequences of my actions began to take shape. Sarah's desperation turned into obsession. She called me at all hours, leaving voicemails filled with venom and grief. In one message, her voice trembled as she said, "You think you've won? You've only built your castle on lies, and one day it'll crumble." I brushed it off at first, but her words lingered. Daniel and I moved in together shortly after the divorce was finalized. He was attentive and caring, always making me feel cherished. But there were moments, brief and fleeting, where I caught him staring at his phone or looking distant. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. After all, we had been through so much together. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging thought. What if history repeated itself? As my pregnancy progressed, those doubts grew louder. Daniel was supportive, yet there were times I felt like I was carrying this burden alone. He worked longer hours and seemed preoccupied, leaving me to wonder if the cracks in his marriage with Sarah had already started forming in ours. Meanwhile, Sarah's life spiraled further out of control. She lost her job, moved out of her house, and fell into a downward spiral of drinking and self-destruction. Mutual friends told me she had become unrecognizable, a shell of the confident woman I once trusted. And while part of me felt vindicated, another part couldn't help but feel pity. Had I gone too far? The baby's arrival temporarily pushed those doubts aside. Holding my son for the first time filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Daniel's tears of joy melted my heart, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. But the illusion didn't last. One night, as I nursed the baby in our dimly lit room, I noticed Daniel's phone buzzing on the nightstand. He was asleep, so I reached over to silence it, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a message from Sarah. "You'll never love her the way you loved me." My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen. The timestamp showed it had been sent hours earlier, and Daniel hadn't replied. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she still had access to him. I woke him up, demanding an explanation. He swore he hadn't spoken to her in weeks, claiming she was unstable and looking for attention. But I saw the hesitation in his eyes, the same hesitation I had seen in Ryan's. The trust one thought we'd rebuilt began to crack. Over the next few weeks, paranoia consumed me. I checked his phone when he wasn't looking, monitored his calls, and questioned every late-night meeting. The same behavior I once despised in Ryan now consumed me, and I hated myself for it. And then came the final blow. Sarah showed up at our door. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair disheveled, and her voice trembling. "You think you can erase me?" she hissed. "You stole my husband, my life, and now you think you can live happily ever after? It doesn't work like that, Emily." Daniel tried to shut the door, but she shoved it open. "You'll never replace me," she screamed. Her words hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about her. It was about me, about the part of me that feared I wasn't enough. I broke down that night. I sobbed as Daniel held me, promising that Sarah was gone, that we were stronger than her games. But the damage was already done. The love we shared was tainted, built on broken trust and shattered hearts. And while we tried to move forward, there was always an invisible wall between us, a reminder of the betrayal that brought us together. Sarah eventually disappeared from our lives, but her shadow lingered. Every time I saw Daniel glance at his phone or hesitate when I asked him a question, the doubt returned. I had won my revenge, but at what cost? The fallout wasn't just Sarah's broken life, it was the cracks in mine. I had built my victory on their destruction, but I hadn't realized I was also destroying myself in the process. In the quiet moments after the chaos, I found myself staring at my son as he slept, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. He was innocent, blissfully unaware of the tangled web of lies, betrayal, and revenge that had shaped his existence. But I couldn't escape it. The echoes of my choices followed me everywhere. Daniel and I tried to move forward, building a life that looked picture-perfect on the outside. We smiled for photos, hosted family dinners, and shared sweet moments with our baby. But beneath the surface, cracks remained, cracks I had tried so hard to ignore. I often wondered if Daniel truly loved me, or if I was just a rebound, the woman who made him feel whole after Sarah broke his trust. And even worse, I wondered if I had only chosen him to get back at Sarah, not because I truly loved him. These thoughts consumed me, but I never voiced them. I couldn't. Doing so would mean admitting that my revenge hadn't given me the closure I craved. Sarah, meanwhile, had disappeared completely. She deleted her social media, stopped contacting mutual friends, and vanished from our lives. Part of me felt relieved, but another part felt haunted by the thought of what I had done to her. I wanted to believe she deserved it, that her betrayal justified everything that followed. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I couldn't help but wonder, was I really any better than her? I had become the very thing I hated, a woman driven by jealousy and insecurity, willing to destroy someone else's life to feel whole again. But there was no turning back. I focused on my son, promising myself I would give him a better life, a life free from lies and manipulation. I wanted to raise him to be better than I was, to understand that revenge doesn't heal wounds, it only deepens them. And as the months passed, I began to let go. I stopped obsessing over Daniel's every move, and I stopped replaying the past in my head. Instead, I focused on the future, the life I wanted for myself and my child. but the scars remained. Every so often, I'd catch Daniel staring at me, really staring, and I wondered if he had the same doubts I did. Did he regret leaving Sarah? Did he wonder if I was capable of betraying him, too? The truth is, I'll probably never know. What I do know is this: revenge doesn't fix what's broken. It might feel satisfying in the moment, but the aftermath is messy, complicated, and full of regret. I learned that the hard way. Looking back, I wish I had handled things differently. I wish I had confronted Sarah and Ryan directly instead of letting my anger and pain turn me into someone I didn't recognize. But life doesn't give us do-overs. And so, I chose to move forward. I made peace with my choices, even if they weren't perfect. I forgave myself for the woman I had been in those dark moments, and I promised to never let my pain control me again. Because at the end of the day, no amount of revenge can undo betrayal. It can't erase the hurt or restore the trust that's been broken. The only way to heal is to let go, to stop looking back and start building something new. And that's what I did. But sometimes late at night, when the house is silent and the shadows feel too heavy, I still wonder, what if I had chosen forgiveness instead of revenge? Would I be happier? Or would I still be haunted by the scars of the past? I guess I'll never know. What would you have done in my place? Could you have forgiven the betrayal? Or would you have sought revenge like I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another shocking tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. Trust me, there's more drama to come. Stay tuned.